This is Public Resource. OMR for Creatives from Public Resource.
Next, let's consider OMR projects for a scored ensemble. If you're applying OMR to a piece for an ensemble fronted by a conductor, like an orchestra or a wind band, you may have access to a conductor's score. If so, you'll probably want to apply the OMR to the score and not the individual player's parts. Everything you need is in the conductor's score, and keeping all the parts synchronized is likely to be easier. But now the music, and hence the OMR process, gets more complicated. First, beware. Most, but not all, conductor scores show the individual player's parts as written for them. That means you may encounter some transposing instruments, multiple clefs, and even some variations in notation among the various players. A conductor is expected to have a working knowledge of all the instruments and how their parts are notated. So traditionally, conductor scores display the parts as the players see them. And that means transposing instruments will appear to be in keys other than the actual key of the composition. You'll need to become a bit of a conductor yourself to do a successful scored ensemble OMR, but the Soundslice OMR engine will help. So before you run a scored ensemble OMR, determine whether your score includes transposed instruments. Usually, you'll just need to look at the key signature for each tonal instrument. Here's an example. The flute, piccolo, and oboe are non-transposing, but the piccolo doubles the flute up one octave, so you'll have to consider that. Next, we have the E-flat sopranino clarinet, and that sounds up a minor third. Next, the typical B-flat clarinets sound 2 semitones lower. And the E-flat alto clarinet sounds down a major sixth. Finally, we have the bassoon, which is non-transposing, but it's in bass clef. If they're all shown in the same key, that means you won't need to do any transpositions, except for the unlikely situations where all your instruments are transposing, for example, a quartet of B-flat trumpets. By contrast, film and television scores often display all the instruments in concert pitch, so watch for that too. Most of the transposing instruments I encounter are wind instruments, clarinets, F-horns, trumpets, among others. Generally, strings, keyboards, and bass clef instruments are not transposing, except double bass, which generally sounds an octave lower than written. There's always an exception. When you find a transposing instrument, you'll need to inform Soundslice. Here's how. Here's the opening passage of Mozart's Concerto for clarinet in A major. Mozart composed this piece for basset clarinet, an instrument that has since largely fallen out of usage. This version is modified for an A clarinet. It's a good demonstration because it's just the clarinet on the top staff and the piano accompaniment below. I ran it through the Soundslice OMR engine. The raw Soundslice output is on top, and the source is on the bottom. It looks like the source music, but it doesn't sound right. The piano is in concert pitch, but the clarinet is in A, so we need to raise all the notes a minor third. That is, a written A should sound as a concert C. So, when you import, you go to the instruments and you click on the track, and you're going to need to edit the details of the track, and you're going to want to name that one the clarinet in A, because clarinets are often other keys, typically in fact, and you're going to want to specify that it is a minor third lower, and then you're going to want to go to continue on to the edit screen, and at that point you're going to want to select instruments, and you're going to also give the abbreviated name. Typically this is optional, but helpful, I think. Specify that the instrument's a clarinet, and you're going to also specify that the sound is a clarinet. And now you're going to accept that, and you're going to save that, and now you're going to check to see if you got it. Be careful to select and apply the correct transposition. French horn parts have a bewildering array of transpositions, and though clarinets and trumpets are usually in B flat, clarinets and trumpets in A are also used, especially for older compositions, in sharp keys, and piccolo trumpet is often in A. The score will specify, so pay attention to that. Unusual transpositions are often encountered in 19th century compositions. Soundslice will usually detect and apply the correct clef. For example, violas are usually in C clef, also known as alto clef. For computer-oriented musicians, this can all seem arcane and confusing. It's partly tradition, but the main reason for the various clefs and transpositions is to make written music easier for the musicians to read by keeping it centered around the staff without excessive ledger lines. Ledger lines, extensions for passages above or below the main staff line, become hard for musicians to read after about 3, and the same holds true for Soundslice's OMR engine. When I hear a passage going wrong and see a lot of ledger lines in one of the parts, that's the first place I look for an OMR error. So transposing instrument notation continues to have utility, even in the OMR context. When you're working on a Scored Ensemble OMR project, you'll often encounter lots of multi-bar rests. In most cases, Soundslice handles these well, but if you're finding parts getting out of sync, you may want to try replacing the multi-bar rests with the appropriate number of single-bar rests. I do this routinely. A human player would find this confusing, but mindlessly counting 96 empty measures won't bother the computer. Sometimes the problem is because the multi-bar rest is incorrectly notated. The player would understand to come back in at the beginning of the next section. These kinds of errors are especially common in percussion parts or very sparse parts. They're easy to fix, but not always easy to find. For Scored Ensemble projects, I export the Soundslice OMR product as music XML and then open it in Dorico or MusicScore for additional editing. Here's how. First, open the project in Soundslice and then go to the Edit screen. Then select the More Options menu at the top of the Edit page. It's the 3 dots, sometimes called the ellipsis, or even the meatballs. Choose Export Music XML. You'll probably want to save this file in your work area, but we'll jump straight to opening the music XML file in Dorico. You can use MusicScore, Sibelius, or most any music notation editor. In Dorico, navigate to the Setup screen, usually at the upper left. We named the clarinet part in Soundslice, and Dorico sees that, but it's defaulted to clarinet in B-flat, the most common clarinet, so open the options in the clarinet track and start by changing the instrument. You'll need to select the instrument's category, woodwinds, then the clarinet in the next column, and finally A instead of B-flat. Confirm by clicking Change in the lower right of the dialog box. The 2-staff piano part opened in Dorico titled as Track 2, so we'll change the instrument by going to Keyboards and then selecting Piano. The next step is assigning the instruments. Now it's best to navigate to the Play screen. In the Play screen, we'll start by clicking on the VST and MIDI tab to the left of the tracks. Here we'll patch in the appropriate sounds. For this project, we'll use sampled instruments. Click the plus on the left to add a new sound. In this case, sound 02 for this project. Click the down arrow to open a list of VSTs. VST is short for Virtual Studio Technology. Generally, a VST offers access to sound modules and effects modules. The first level list will be vendors on your system that are accessible from Dorico. For the clarinet, I'll start by picking native instruments. That opens another menu. I'm looking for a clarinet patch served up through Native Instruments Contact 8, an industry-standard sampled instrument platform. Now we're in the Contact 8 library view. I want a clarinet sample, so I type clarinet into the search box. Often you'll audition several choices from the list on the right. However, I'm going to use J, clarinet solo, so I pick on that. That opens the Spitfire Studio Woodwinds Pro solo clarinet. I'll make a couple of quick modifications, different articulation and less reverb to help bring the solo clarinet up to the front. Now the clarinet is patched into this project as instrument 02. If you want to make additional edits to this clarinet, you can always access the Contact 8 player by clicking on the lazy E in the circle on the right side of the box. Now we'll add another instrument by again clicking on the left-hand plus. If we wanted to copy the clarinet, we'd use the middle reverse plus. I'm going to use UA's Ravel piano, so I scroll down and select Universal Audio UAD_X, then piano, then UAD_X Ravel grand piano. After the piano loads, I scroll through the presets for this piano and select Close Room Classic, a good basic grand piano sound. These can always be changed later, but it's worthwhile to pick sounds that are close to how you envision your final product. It's possible to do a final mix in Dorico, but I generally finish my projects in a DAW like Pro Tools or Logic Pro, so this selection is not a final decision. As you can see, the piano is instrument 03 in this session. Now it's time to assign these sound modules to their respective session tracks. Do this in the Track Inspector tab to the left of the VST and MIDI. Select the clarinet track and assign instrument 02. Then select the piano track and assign instrument 03. Now you can play your project in Dorico. Not a bad start. The piano is overwhelming the solo clarinet, so we'll need to adjust that. But here's the thing. We took the trouble to open this project in Dorico because of Dorico's extensive editing capabilities, not so much as a mixer. Realistically, most projects will need many edits, but we'll just show one example here. Note that the trill doesn't come through the Soundslice process, and we really need it. So in Dorico, we go into the right screen and select the clarinet note that needs a trill, open the ornament popover, that's Shift-O, and type TR, and then do the same for the piano note that trills simultaneously. Fixed! Lots of other kinds of trills are possible in Dorico, but I think this basic trill sounds fine. Now play it back with more clarinet and that lovely little trill. That's it. We plan a more extensive foray into using Dorico for OMR, but that's a sprawling subject, so let's move on for now. I am not a percussionist, so for me at least, percussion parts present some special problems. Pitched percussion instruments, such as a xylophone, are typically notated separately, like any other instrument. However, drums and other unpitched percussion instruments don't have particularly consistent notation. Percussionists adapt to each piece individually. Some people craft elaborate percussion patch templates, but I find it best to set up each piece individually. Typically, I lump all the unpitched percussion together and call it a timpani part because timpani parts are pitched. If there is a timpani, the notated pitches will be preserved and the other drums and percussion will make timpani sounds, but will at least be kept separate. Once I'm confident the drums and percussion are synchronized, I mute that track to keep things orderly. Then, at the end of the composition production process, I deconstruct the temporary timpani part in the intermediate editing stage, Dorico, MuseScore, or similar composition editing software. There, each drum or percussion instrument is given its own track, providing freedom in patch selecting and mixing. It sounds tedious, but usually it's not too difficult. Tip: watch for repeat errors in percussion scores. For example, a drum part stopping at an odd spot. So, to summarize, if you're working with a scored ensemble, start out by doing the OMR process on the conductor's score. During the OMR process, take care to assign your instruments and transpositions correctly. Expect unpitched drums and percussion to require some manual work, so just be sure to avoid having more than one percussion instrument on any particular note.
Our work at Public Resource is made possible by a generous grant from Arcadia